Hello, my name is Tara Galliano, and I'm a clinical couples counselor and certified sex therapist. In this three-part video series, I'm speaking about sexless marriages. In the first one, I talked about what they are, what they're not, and some of the possible causes of sexless marriages. In this video, I'll be talking about some effective strategies that you can begin to employ in your marriage if you can identify that it is sexless. So again, a sexless marriage is where the sexual connection is not frequent, in that it's 10 times or less in a year. So that's once or less than once a month. And also that there's a dissatisfaction with that. So it is not just the number that is the metric, but it is also how you feel about it, right? If you're feeling disconnected or lonely or confused about your sexual experiences with your partner, this may be the video series for you. So, coming into effective strategies, right? So most couples think there's a few things that they can do to begin to address this issue of a sexless marriage. And the first thing is they talk about it, and they talk about sex, and they talk about what it is that they're going to do about it. Great. And then the second thing oftentimes couples do is they begin to date. And the third thing, which is also very common, is they do nothing. And most of these strategies by themselves are not actually addressing the issue, so therefore they're actually not very effective. I think it's great, at least the first two, to have those ideas and to initiate, but oftentimes it takes more than that. And I have seen that, and I have seen that in multiple couples over the years, probably hundreds of couples, maybe even thousands of couples over the past 2.5 decades that I've been doing this work, that it's good to have the effort, but then the strategy actually that is most impactful needs to be addressing the root cause of what is going on. So I'm going to go into some effective strategies that I have seen over the years that have been actually really beneficial. So one of the things that I actually am seeing a lot more of and really beginning to name is that for women, there's a pervasive shame, and the shame is not so much I'm not enough, but more I don't need pleasure, pleasure is optional, and I see this in a wide range of settings. I first began to notice this in my work with women who had life-threatening illnesses, particularly cancer, and there was a desire to engage in the classes that I was teaching, which was called Rediscovering My Body, which is also the name of my book. And the women would engage because they imagined that it would be helpful for their partners, right? If they came to class, they might learn something, a tool or technique that they can engage with their beloved. However, that wasn't true, because really what I was teaching was that they could have more pleasure for themselves, and that's a primary relationship. And most women weren't looking there, and they were imagining that they didn't want to actually tap into any more resources, particularly these women with long-term illnesses like cancer. They didn't want to tap into any more psychological resources or financial resources or emotional or spiritual or time resources. They didn't want to drain anymore, which is what they felt like they were doing with the recovery process of their illness and also the diagnosis process. And so there was a way that they were feeling like they would do it only if somebody else could gain from the process, but not necessarily themselves. And that's not how pleasure works. That's not how a lot of things work, but particularly pleasure and sexual connection. So there's an element of shame that you don't deserve this. And the truth is, you do. And not only do you deserve it, but you need to own it in order for this to be effective. In order for this to work, right? These strategies that I'm going to offer you, that you actually need to own it, that you deserve it. So this is not a cookie cutter approach. I'm going to go into 4 strategies, which are not necessarily the map, but a map. And so the first one is about communication, moving from blame to curiosity, more discovery of what is. Oftentimes we just get so frustrated with these cycles of not having the pleasure that we want, and certainly not having the pleasure that we want with our partners, that we get stuck in a pattern of blame. Like, you're doing this to me, why won't you give me what I want? And the opportunity, I believe, with all of these situations that feel like we're being victimized, is to bring much more curiosity, and compassion for oneself and for the other. So it could look like, do you feel like touch, right? So instead of blaming for not feeling like touching, I'm not going to make an assumption or expectation, but I actually just may ask, I'm curious, do you feel like touch, right? Do you feel okay if I touch you? So on a scale of 1 to 5, which I've learned from my engineer employees is actually a better scale because it's odd, right? 1 to 5, what is the scale? 1 being low, 5 being high. How would you rate your desire to have me touch you? And there's questions, open-ended questions in terms of communicating. What would you desire if no one judged you, right? If you could have anything that you wanted, what would you desire and what would you ask for? Oftentimes, because in long-term relationships where there has been no sex and not pleasured connections, there's a lot of blame and there's a lot of judgment. But if no one were judging you, what would you ask for? So oftentimes people don't know. And so I provide some sentence stems like, I feel relaxed when we, right? So really beginning to identify what it is that helps you, and that those sentence stems are just opportunities to begin to explore what it is that eases you, that creates more calm in your nervous system, which is a great place to access pleasure. Another strategy in terms of communication is what I like to call a desire inventory. So really looking at what it is that turns you on, what is it that brings you pleasure, and allowing yourself to brainstorm, because it is more personal than for you to share with your partner, although you can share it with your partner, because what that does is that helps dispel assumptions or expectations, right? Because you're going to share what it is true for you. And the opportunity when you brainstorm and you do it in the privacy of your own space, right? That you give yourself permission to explore whatever that may look like. So the second strategy is to remove pressure. And oftentimes this seems antithetical, and it's not a very popular one initially, because in sexless marriages, and if people are coming to sex therapy, they imagine the solution is to have sex. Well, yes, and the opportunity is to just name it and be really conscious of, we're not having sex, so let's actually extend that for a finite period of 30 to 60 days where there is no expectation that the sex happen, right? We're just going to take it off the table or off the bed, right? It's just not going to happen. And then what does happen is low stakes touch. Maybe it's holding hands, or maybe it is kissing, maybe it is a massage, and maybe some of these things you're already engaged, because even if you're not sexually connected, maybe you still are physically connected. However, then I want you to engage in those activities with more consciousness, more presence, and a longer duration. So if you are already holding hands, maybe it's just something that you do briefly on a walk, but maybe you're going to hold hands all day. Every time that you let go, you come back to holding hands. Or maybe you kiss and you peck each other on the cheek as you leave, but maybe you have a makeout session, right? Maybe you have 5-10 minute makeout session. And so the opportunity is that you're connecting more in ways that are not around sex per se, but are deeply satisfying. So the third strategy has to do with being a good girl. And this is a deeper exploration that I'm offering at my Unshamed retreat this June. But essentially, one of my mentors would say that the world runs on good girl energy, and I do believe that is true. And what I have seen is, with the high achieving women that I have worked with, both, right? Either they don't like sex, so they don't do it, they fake it, they imagine it is something for their partner and not for themselves, or they're an overachiever and they don't have sex with their partner, but they may step out of the relationship and have it. And then what is happening? They're not consciously choosing to be sexual. They're dismissing their own sexual desires. Maybe they don't know. And they're imagining that because they don't have sexual desires at this time, they may never have them, or they don't want to have them, which could be true. But oftentimes there are layers of this that are socially conditioned, that are an acceptance of something, this is just the way it is, that may actually not be true. And part of it comes with a lack of education. A lot of us don't learn that desire doesn't always precede arousal. So sometimes we need to feel aroused before we have desire. And that is a game changer once you understand that and begin to explore what is it that brings you pleasure. And shame is a huge inhibitor. So we need to disrupt that one more and more. The fourth strategy is taken from the playbook of Masters and Johnson, which is sensate focus. So like the removal of sex, strategy number 2, this one is more focused on sensual connection, and it goes week by week, where the first week you would engage in sensual touch, maybe with your clothes on. In week 2, you would engage in sensual touch with your partner, where maybe you take off some of your clothes. However, in the first 2 weeks, there is no genital touch. In week 3, maybe you begin to include genital touch, and in week 4, maybe you're engaged in more sexually explicit activity. So the sensate focus exercises are gradual and specific. So for closure, right? A sexless marriage is not a verdict, right? If you are in a sexless marriage and you don't find it satisfying and you want to change that, the invitation is to learn skills that actually you probably didn't learn or probably didn't know before because no one ever taught them to you. So that can be an uncomfortable place. But the opportunity is to be in your beginner's mind, to be the novice, to step into the discomfort, because your relationship might be worth it, right? It might be worth it for you and your partner to actually explore with consciousness what brings you pleasure, knowing that it doesn't need to be work. It could be play, it can be creative, it can be imaginative, and that you deserve it. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you so much for joining me today. Much love.